and welcome to Talk This.
It's dangerous to podcast alone.
I'm your let me edutain you host, Madelyn.
I'm your typing Space Invaders host, Emma.
And thanks for tuning into this week's show. It's my side quest. It's my turn. And if I had really been trying to be really topical, I would have done like games about sleep deprivation.
There's probably a good amount of those.
I know.
To be honest,
maybe later. This won't be the last time. And
there are many video games where I do wonder, when do they sleep?
So look forward to that eventually. I also contemplated one on fast travel, but I felt like we had done too much that was like related to that.
Sure.
Can we tell that I've been traveling for work this week? But what we're actually going to be doing is celebrating the end of the school year. It's summer vacation. And we're going to talk about edutainment games.
Yeah. I do think edutainment is very distinct from, like, gamification.
Yes.
Right? This is specifically, like, games that are meant to educate you, but games, not just things that give you points and achievements for, like, doing stuff, right?
That's
like,
right.
Duolingo is, like, a gamified language learning system, right? Because you have leaderboards and you level up through the ranks and that sort of stuff, but it's not a game. It's not, you don't really play Duolingo. So that's not the stuff we're talking about. We're talking about educational video games. Edutainment.
I do feel like sometimes on Sundays when it's like I'm trying to get out of the demotion zone or something on Duolingo, it does briefly become a game.
Yeah.
But only because of the competitive elements. Briefly becomes a sport, perhaps.
Yeah. Yeah, there you go.
So it was really interesting to me to read about this because I felt like So what's interesting to me is that I had assumed that my lack of awareness of edutainment games now had to do with the fact that I'm no longer like 7 years old. Right?
Yeah.
But it does sort of seem like our childhoods also corresponded with sort of the end of the golden age of edutainment games. And so while I had assumed that the fact that I no longer really knew what the equivalent to like Putt-Putt Goes to the Zoo is now, was that I am no longer the target age group for that game, it does partially seem to be, oh, actually people don't make these anymore. Or if they do, they're really crappy apps.
I sort of was thinking about, I wonder if part of that is like, I don't think schools really have computer labs anymore.
No, everybody's got a Chromebook.
Because everybody's got their own laptop, even in elementary schools for some. They have some sort of device that they carry around with them for school versus we, in the olden times, would pack up and go on a little field trip to the computer lab, which was always very exciting, where they kept all the desktop computers.
Or eventually they'd have the cart of laptops that they'd, like, roll out.
Yes, that was really, like, in high school for me, was when we started getting the laptop carts. But we still went to the computer lab sometimes. But in elementary school specifically, we went to the computer lab, and I would sometimes turn off the computer because they were the stand-up ones under the thing, and I would kick my little child feet, and I'd hit the off button. Anyway, that's my elementary school story.
Where's the game that would teach Emma not to do that?
I think, like, you could, like, really set up, like, a time that you're playing the game, right? Because somebody could go into the computer lab ahead of time and, like, install the game on all the computers and make sure it's ready, versus having to have a whole group of elementary school kids installing software onto their school-assigned laptops before you actually get into it,
Look, again, an important skill for those children to learn. But yes.
But it's not really, we need to install the game about learning how to install things on your computer. Yeah, the one I remember most is typing, which I have, like, a distinct memory of, like, a typing thing where it was like sort of like Space Invaders, which I don't know if I've made up, but there was definitely some sort of typing thing where you had to like keep typing as fast as possible or you would like die.
I really think that's Type to Learn.
Sure. I don't know.
That's
and
the
I think
one
we
I
did
remember.
Oregon Trail at least once or twice as well.
Oregon Trail, I think, is so interesting because, of course, we've talked about Oregon Trail specifically on the show before, so you can go back and listen to that episode if you want to hear more detailed thoughts about. You don't actually say it, like, you died of dysentery is a fake quote from Oregon Trail, but if you want to hear more thoughts about dying of dysentery, you can go listen to that episode. But I really feel like even though Oregon Trail is held up as one of the early and prime examples of educational edutainment games, I don't know that an Oregon Trail released today, we would point at it and go, that's edutainment.
I mean, you used it very specifically for that part in elementary school history when you learn about the Oregon Trail.
Right.
So, I don't know. It's suitable.
I just mean, I don't mean to say
M.
it's not. I just mean, I feel like there are other games that theoretically could be slotted into a history curriculum in a somewhat similar way as Oregon Trail.
Such as? I would love to hear these games.
The Assassin's Creed thing.
Okay, sure. That's very different from... There isn't an Oregon Trail Assassin's Creed yet. I bet that's what will happen after Japan. Finally. Oregon's Trail Assassin's Creed. It's what the people have been asking for.
It wasn't dysentery all along. It was an assassin. I mean, there's a bunch of compounding variables here, right? Because another reason that Oregon Trail is a game that can be played in school is that it's relatively simple, right? And so if I can point to games that are sort of similarly historical now, it's hard to be like, you're going to play Pentiment in school.
Yeah. Also, it's that you couldn't, because believe it's rated M.
Sure. I mean, many things.
Yes.
Right? All this to say is that I believe there must be other games about history that exist that are out there. And if you created Oregon Trail is basically a roguelike, right? If you created
Sure.
sort of a history... Just throwing that out there and not letting you argue with it. If you created a sort of semi-historical roguelike, no one would be like, that's an educational game for 4th graders.
Sure.
Especially when it's as hard as Oregon Trail.
I think that was part of the learning, right?
Sure. Children are
People
soft
died
today, though, Emma.
on the Oregon Trail.
They have to be, uplifted.
Right.
They have to believe that they would have survived the Oregon Trail.
Anyway, you're right. The big, I feel like the biggest sort of educational game, thing that has been made in modern times is the Assassin's Creed Discovery Tour mode, which they started with the one that was in Egypt Origins?
Yeah.
Origins. Which is essentially like they made a version of their game where there's no combat, the guards don't attack you, animals don't attack anybody. You just sort of take role of an avatar, like various different types of characters you can pick, and you experience the world that they have built. And they create various tours. I think Origins had 70 or so, that are about 20 minutes long each, that are focused on certain aspects of the world, and includes both the historical facts as well as oftentimes commentary on why the game isn't historically accurate in some places, whether it's size or some other detail that they chose to change for the purposes of the game itself. Apparently it was quite difficult to make because they had to strip out a lot of the systems in there. The guards wave at you now instead of trying to kill you.
Nice.
Yeah.
I'm going to say something controversial, though. I mean, I did just call this out as an edutainment game, but I don't know that if we're going to get really technical about it, that the Assassin's Creed tours are like really games. I mean, they are. They're walking simulators, right?
Sure.
But they're certainly not games in the way that sort of the prime examples of this from like the 80s and 90s are games.
Yes, I think that's perfectly fair. You don't really have, well, I guess you have tasks, right? Theoretically, because you're going through the tour, but not really tasks in the sense that you are really doing much to achieve them. I also couldn't really find much on like how these have been used or how effective it had been from like an educator's perspective. I mostly just get a lot of Ubisoft links when I try to search it.
It's certainly a great marketing tool.
Yeah, it's not that I think that they didn't put a lot of work into it and were passionate about doing it, right? They already have historians on the staff there, right, to help them with whatever the game they're working on. So it was really just like an extension of that and wanting to do that. But the only thing I found was like a study with like 300 students where one of them went through like a tour and one of them was taught the tour by a teacher. And they both improved their scores, but the teacher one improved by like 10% more, which it doesn't seem like a great study to me.
Yeah.
Like the going solo through the game versus like being actually taught by a human doesn't really feel equivalent. In terms of, it just doesn't feel equivalent. I feel like it should have been like reading or watching or something to really get a sense.
Actually, it would be really interesting to see if playing the Discovery Tour versus watching a playthrough of it had any impact.
Yeah. And again, it was like only 300 students, and it was like a specific learning outcomes. It wasn't really holistic. But that's the only thing I could really find of like if people have actually looked at the impact of this. And it was on something like, it was like classcraft.com or something. So I don't know. Yeah, it's not a game in the same sense that Oregon Trail is a game. And it's hard to say how effective it actually is. And I feel like it would be a pain in the butt to set up for students too. I
mean, yeah, you need like console or like
I believe they're on PC.
High-end PC, decently high-end PCs.
Yeah.
There is also Minecraft education.
Right.
Which they have just like a lot of lessons to do a lot of different things in Minecraft. Which of course, right? Like it's a sandbox. You can pretty like if you know enough about how to set things up in Minecraft, like of course you can use it to teach math. Of course you can use it to they have all of these resources. Like I'm like looking at it right now. It's like they have lessons on like India's independence movement, on Juneteenth, on like climate. There's all these like Minecraft lessons, biodiversity, pollinating bee gardens. Yeah. Right?
I mean, I don't know how the current young generation, I don't really know how into Minecraft they are. They currently exist, I guess.
Fair enough. It's like Roblox for the olds, right?
Yeah. I mean, I don't think it's unpopular, but there was certainly a period of time from like our generation and a little bit past when Minecraft was just like everybody was playing Minecraft. So in a way, it does make sense that educators would want to capitalize that on some way to get student interest, which unfortunately I don't think you can really do with Roblox.
It's just too messy.
Yeah.
Roblox, I mean, I don't know. I suppose if Roblox created some kind of educator mode, maybe, but I think as it stands right now, it's too open, right?
Yeah.
There's too many ways for kids to end up places. I mean, already, just in Roblox generally, there's already too many ways for kids to end up places where, like, kids should not be playing that, probably. and certainly not in the classroom. But I also think that, like, in many ways, and probably this was an issue with Minecraft to some extent too, but like, more than 50% of kids play Roblox is a statistic that I've seen before, and it could be significantly higher than that. And I just feel like they know too much about how to play it as a game. And I think you would lose control.
Well, I don't know if you can, like, lock things off to people
Sure.
in Minecraft if you're in charge of the world, I believe.
Yeah.
So you do have some control over what the kids can actually do within a space.
Yeah.
In a way that you don't really in, like, Roblox, for example. So not to say that you're wrong there. I'm sure kids can figure out how to cause trouble no matter what you're doing. So at that point, you can't really be worried about it. But you can mitigate what the students would actually be able to mess around with in the world.
So all this to say that edutainment now has like become some slightly prestige-y versions of existing blockbuster games, right? That being sort of Minecraft, Assassin's Creed, whatever. And then just a cavalcade of trashy, horrible dollar apps. So how are the kids even learning? How are they learning anything?
I don't think they are, you know?
Yeah, maybe they're not.
I'll have to ask a child. Hello, child. Learning anything?
Learned anything recently? It was fascinating to me to jump into kind of the history of this genre because there's so much drama. There's so much secret drama.
Regale us with the secret drama, Madelyn.
Okay, so let's start with the one that isn't so much about, like, corporate everything. Let's talk about typing. Let's talk about, when we talk about typing, we have to talk about Mavis Beacon. Synonymous with typing, unless your clickbait boyfriend, who I shared this story with, and he's like, who's Mavis Beacon?
I don't think he ever learned how to type.
He doesn't know. It's crazy. He actually doesn't know how to type. He types with his nose. This is another thing too. I do feel like I've seen that kids today, because they don't necessarily do the same kind of dedicated typing lessons because everyone assumes that they can type because they've been attached to computers since birth. That kids don't know how to type anymore. It's crazy. They didn't have Space Invaders typing games like us. But anyway, you've probably, if you're a person who learned to type at a certain period of time, heard of Mavis Beacon. Mavis Beacon, of Mavis Beacon Teaches Typing fame, was like the breakthrough typing typing software. Launched in 1987, like sold millions and millions and millions of copies, like totally changed the game. And so you're probably thinking, man, wonder what Mavis is up to. Like, who's Mavis Beacon? Wonder what she's up to these days. She must be rolling in dough. And there have been, like, many stories kind of like breaking this story over the past several decades. But would you believe it that Mavis Beacon is not real? She is not a real... I mean, she's a real person in that there is a model whose photo that they used. But Mavis Beacon is not a typing expert. She is a made-up character to sell you typing software.
And, you know, I was reading your notes on this, and I didn't, like, how did they decide this?
What do you mean, how did they...
like, yeah, Mavis Beacon. We've made the character, and her name is Mavis Beacon.
They actually did talk about this in one of the articles that I was reading. Mavis was, like, based on it was a name of some character from a TV show, I think, Mavis. And then Beacon, like, shining a light.
Okay.
I know.
How about why are they like, yes, normal woman will be the mascot of our typing game?
Well, the story of what happened is, yeah, they apparently had made some other, I think a chess game right before this, where they had put, like, a real model playing a wizard on the cover. And people really responded to that. They responded to the idea that there's a real person.
A real wizard.
A real wizard. And so that because of that, they wanted to have a real person teaching typing as well. And so what happened is one of the guys at the company that was making this was just like walking through Saks Fifth Avenue, I guess, as one does, and like saw a woman working at the cosmetic counter and was like, that's it, that's her. That's who's gonna be the face of our game. Which is crazy. It's like, you know, Steven Spielberg plucks you off the street.
And pays you $500.
Yes, her name was Renee L'Esperance. She apparently had very long fingernails, which made her, like, why would you look at her and think she could type? Depending on the story, sometimes she just has, like, you know, normal long length. Sometimes they're 3-inch nails. Some tellings of the story say she had 7-inch long nails.
I hope that's true.
Seems implausible to me. At least one of the articles I was reading was like, the idea that this like black woman working at Saks Fifth Avenue in the 80s would have these 7-inch long nails and like that would be something she would be allowed to have and have that job seems implausible.
Fair enough.
I know. But yeah, she was paid $500 to do this like modeling shoot. And then that was it. And there actually just came out this year like a documentary of people trying to find this woman. You know, she corresponded with the development team and was sort of pleased with the success of these games for a few years. And then there was apparently, and it's like hard to find the details of some of this stuff. There was apparently she like sued them over some manipulation of her image somewhere around the 5th edition of it. And then she disappeared. But never saw, you know, another dime of the millions and millions of these, even though like she is the one who teaches you typing.
Yeah.
There were a lot of other kind of like, well, actually, a few things first. So first of all, the like sort of positive story or funny stories. I mean, that's the kind of negative story, right? Is that like they did this like random woman. They seem to have done it with like decently good intentions, but like now it was like, we're going to have a random black woman and our team is all white dudes. Like that would be a problem, right? But there was apparently, you know, they had like sent in this box art to their, I don't know, publisher, distributor, or something like that. And the publisher distributor was like, I don't know, like having a black woman as the mascot, like there's some areas of the company where that's going to impact sales. Like you should rethink this. And they stuck with it. They were like, we want to do this. This is the woman we want. This perfect Saks Fifth Avenue woman. So, you know, wholesome and empowering, stuck to their strange determination here.
Sure. Would have still been nice to fare more than $500 once the money came rolling in, but
it would be, and yet. But I did really enjoy all of the anecdotes of people thinking she was real. So, you know, for years they would get like several calls a week trying to book her for speaking engagements, right? And wanting to get in touch with her. And then I also really liked, and this must have been like right when the game came out. There's a quote from one of the guys who made it. He says, I remember at the computer trade show Comdex in 1987, walking around and having some of the competitors from 2 of the original typing products come up to me and say, what a coup! How did you get Mavis Beacon to endorse your product? We've been after her endorsement for years. And when they did that, I knew we had a hit.
Business people are crazy.
You could just like it's like a David Mamet play, kind of like you just like imagine like Alec Baldwin being like, been after her endorsement for years. Drop a few F-bombs in there, etc.
Yeah.
Mavis effing Beacon. You mother effer. How'd you do it?
You should write this. I don't know. They couldn't track her down, so probably you shouldn't write this.
No, I know. I feel like if I feel like it could be good. I feel like Mavis effing Beacon alone feels like sells it.
And that's it. That's the pull quote.
Anyway, taught a lot of people to type, but yeah, man, she is fake. And they, to be fair, these guys did not go around saying she was real.
Right.
They just didn't correct people.
Yeah.
Which is what makes it, aside from the fact that this woman did not see any penny of the success, I think makes it mostly a charming story as opposed to a, like, consumer misleading story. Certainly not something you could get away with today. But that's not even the only like bizarro moment in the history of edutainment, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, as we talked about, like throughout the 80s and 90s, loads of these games, and like in many ways relatively high quality, like games that people love, came out, right? You've got Math Blaster, where I played a little bit of this. I played a little bit of this online. You're just like a little space dude and you solve math problems and you get points. Cool. Great. Probably not. I think another problem today is that like kids are maybe a little too sophisticated. So many of these games are quite simple, and I don't know that they would be as exciting to kids today.
Sure.
Who are running around on Roblox or whatever. Not that Roblox is so sophisticated, but you know what I mean.
Yeah.
There's Rita Rabbit. There's Where in the World is Carmen Sandiego? There's Putt Putt. There's Freddy Fish. There's all sorts of these games. Pajama Sam.
When you wrote Putt, I don't remember Putt Putt. So when you wrote Putt Putt in the notes, I was like, Putt Putt Golf?
I can't believe you don't remember Putt Putt.
I don't remember Putt Putt.
His little purple car. Putt Putt goes to the zoo.
Putt Putt Golf will teach you spatial awareness for sure. What a good educational game. Like
a bunch of these games, yeah, Putt Putt and Pajama Sam and whatever, were made by, like a kind of Lucas Games alums type people, like who made a company called Humongous Entertainment that just made tons and tons and tons of these like voice acted. The puzzles change when you play through the game a second time, like pretty high quality games for teaching children some basic reading and mathematics and computer literacy skills, right?
Mm-hmm.
However, capitalism finds a way. So basically, it was fascinating to me because it was like it feels very akin to what we were talking about with the App Store when we were talking about Monument Valley a few weeks ago. This idea of like at first there were these like high quality games. People were making high quality games. And then people saw that there was a market and it got flooded with crap. And that's more or less what happened to the edutainment industry in the 90s. However, there's a fun Shark Tank connection.
I love a fun Shark Tank connection.
Nothing like it. So pre-Shark Tank, Kevin O'Leary, that's his name, right?
Sure.
It is. I doubted myself on the last name for a moment, but it is. Kevin O'Leary, who's one of the guys on Shark Tank, he had a company called SoftKey. And the company that was really like the biggest player in the edutainment industry like during this time was the Learning Company, which made like a ton of these games. There's also Broderbund and MECC. So between these companies and Humongous as well, like they made pretty much any educational game that you would have heard of, right? Broderbund made Carmen Sandiego, they made Mavis Beacon, MECC made the Oregon Trail, right? All of this stuff. And in sort of the late 90s, these games were selling like crazy, right? Like millions of dollars a year. Growing. So SoftKey bought up a ton of these companies in about 1995. And then things started to get bad. Basically, in much the same way as like the price collapse of games on the App Store and even the price collapse of games in like digital marketplaces, right? But like after they bought this, they were like fighting for market share in this oversaturated market, so they slashed the prices on these games. This is also around the time like Disney was kind of coming onto the scene, and so they were having to fight against the mouse, which is challenging, right? There's also I felt like this was a little bit history repeats itself as well. There's an article about this on a website called The Outline by Abigail Kane. And And so here's a quote about this. So Softkey acquired the Learning Company, and then it actually renamed itself the Learning Company to take advantage of its strong reputation, continuing to gobble up industry powerhouses. All told, Softkey bought more than 20 entities, becoming the world's second largest consumer software company after Microsoft in the process. O'Leary basically saw software companies as commodities. He was the soulless business person who came in and bought a bunch of companies and scaled them back and laid off all the good people. Gee, what does that sound like?
What's that company's name again that bought all the companies
recently? I can't even remember. That's how
oh my God.
Totally horrible they are.
Embracer
Group. I can't remember the exact same moment.
Yes, it does sound exactly like Embracer Group. You're correct.
But for kids' games.
Yeah.
But it gets worse. So somehow, Softkey, now the Learning Company, aka Children's Embracer Group, tricks Mattel of Barbie fame into buying this company for $3.6 billion in 1998. And this has gone down as one of like the all-time worst business acquisitions ever in history. Like, it's studied in schools. It's not clear exactly why it became such a disaster. I mean, some of it has to do with like these games that had been being sold for $40 were now being sold for $10, right? Basically, it's the same old story of like the games were more expensive to make, but we have to sell them for less. And so Mattel ended up selling it like basically for parts for like 10% or 20% of what they paid for it just a couple years later.
It reminds me a little bit of, obviously on a much smaller scale, but the Activision purchase.
Yes, it certainly does, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Anyway, what was super interesting about this is that I then saw several articles that was like, because of this notoriously horrible business deal that happened, basically for a long time after this, you couldn't make an education game that was too fun, or people would think it was like these like historic failure of a game thing.
Wow.
You had to like make sure it was very educational, or people would be like, oh no, it's like that thing that cost Mattel billions of dollars.
Yeah, it was Math Blaster specifically that did it.
Yeah.
Nothing else.
Anyway, it's just crazy. It was crazy to read about this and have it not just be like, oh, like I said at the beginning of the episode, I just sort of assumed that games like this had probably continued to be made. And no, there was like a bubble.
Now all we make is Japanese learning games.
And coding.
And coding, yeah. All we make is coding and Japanese learning games. I really was struck when I was looking into this. I was like, man, people are making a lot of games where you can learn Japanese.
Because learning Japanese is hard.
Yeah, and, you know, it makes some sense, right? Because your target audience is gamers, and probably, if you're a gamer enough to have heard of an indie game that teaches Japanese, you might be passingly interested in Japanese, right? So I get why. But it is interesting that there feels like there's more specifically Japanese learning games than there are, like, just language learning games out there.
Well, I think it's gotta be because, you know, learning the characters in Japanese is such a lift. Like,
yeah.
There's something a little gamier about having to memorize some pictures.
Yeah, there is the idea of, like, you learning a new alphabet, right?
Yeah.
As opposed to just, like, words. Like, you don't need to learn French or Spanish. You don't really have to learn a new alphabet. And probably there's several reasons why they might not make learning Russian games, I guess.
It is interesting, though, given that it's, like, objectively more useful, that it's Japanese learning games that dominate the market and not Chinese learning games.
Admittedly, I don't know as much about Chinese, but they don't really have, like, a hiragana, katakana equivalent, right? They just have the characters.
Yeah.
So in a way, Japanese is also more approachable
Yeah.
than Chinese, of not just like throwing you in the deep end of here are all these very complicated characters to learn.
I have one other, like, what could have been early edutainment story, which is, did you know that there was a Mario Teaches Typing game?
No, but it makes sense.
It was one of Charles Martinet's earliest, like, Mario voicings, where apparently he was like, he read the script and he was like originally Mario would say things like, "Oh, that wasn't very good, try again," in Mario voice.
That's a very long sentence for Mario.
Well, he changed it to something longer, but he said Mario wouldn't criticize you that way.
It's true.
So they changed it to something like, "Not as good this time, but you're gonna do it better this time. Let's go."
Actually, I don't know if it's true. Mario can be a real jerk you can make Mario into a real jerk in the RPG type Mario games.
But, you're right. But he would not be mean to children.
Sure. Yeah. Fair enough.
Anyway, I do want to share what happened with that game is that Miyamoto and co. really liked the Mario Teaches Typing games, apparently. Like, they made a couple of them. But they had licensed Mario, like, there was some other game that they had licensed Mario for that was bad. That came out around the same time. Mm-hmm. And so they were like, "Hey, we can't do this anymore." And they were like, "But Miyamoto, you liked this one." He's like, "Sorry, Brian. No more."
Sorry, Brian?
Yeah.
Is that a real guy, or you just make up Brian?
No, he's a real guy. Brian Fargo,
all right.
head developer of Interplay Entertainment.
There you go. I was sort of reflecting a little bit before this, and this is like a big subjective statement that I'm sure you could disprove me on in various places, but there's not really a lot of games, prefacing with the fact that yes, if you go into the depths of like itch.io, sure, you can probably find a game about anything, right? But there's not a lot of games that feel like they're particularly like educational, in the sense that like you play them and you learn a little bit about like a time or a place or a thing, right? Like, I was thinking, I just finished reading The Name of the Rose, right? And you sort of learn a little bit about Middle Ages and the culture of Christianity at the time and all that sort of stuff, right? And of course I was thinking about Pentiment, which of course is heavily inspired by The Name of the Rose, but I can't think of a lot of other games that are like, historical games that are like really interested in being historical, right? We just talked about Assassin's Creed, and that has a lot of historical set dressing, right? And characters you might recognize, but I don't think those games are really interested in being historical, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And just sort of in general, I feel like the dominant genres of games right now are like fantasy, like loose sci-fi, like more like the aesthetics of space, versus sci-fi. Like, yeah. And like, I don't know, throw in like disaffected teens in there, right? And it doesn't feel like there's a lot of games that are like specifically about like tasks or places or times in a way where you could feel like you're learning a little bit about something real, right? And that's not like, you don't have to learn about something real. Sometimes you play a game and you learn about fictional stuff, and that's fun, right? But I just was thinking a little bit about that. Like, there's Pentiment for historical stuff. We did a whole episode on like languages in games, and there is a subset of like linguistic type games, right? Where you learn about language in general. There's stuff like Kerbal Space Program, which is like more interested in like the launching of rockets, right? And how that actually works. You could say Roller Coaster Tycoon teaches you a little bit about like physics, right? And like how a roller coaster works. But there's not like a ton, I guess, is what I'm saying.
And I guess I would say that even games that do have historical trappings often are then doing like, but there's also magic, or it's an alternate history, or like,
Yeah.
you know, we just talked about Indica, which like theoretically might teach you a little bit about what it is to be a Russian nun at a period of time, but like also it's an alternate history, and also like there's some supernatural elements, and it all gets, we're remixing things, which is cool. But it also means that even if I came to this hoping to learn something, there's like almost too much else going on for me to parse what I would learn.
Yeah. Fire Emblem taught me some math, probably.
Not really though, because like it's like bad statistics that it taught you.
I mean, it was just like I didn't go in like even in the old GBA ones they give you like the avoid attack stat that they whatever they do to take it from the unit's base stats. So what you just do with that is a lot of addition and subtraction, right? And I think mostly what I calculated was like, will they double attack or not, either in one way or another, which you have to be careful if the speed is like a certain amount above the previous one's speed. So there's still a lot of like mental math, like simple mental math, but I was like, I don't know, 10. So
no, but what I don't mean that. What I mean is that so yes, that is math. Real math, absolutely. And like yes, if you dig into some of the Pokemon stuff, like you can learn math. Like there's any number of math things. What I mean to say is that in Fire Emblem, if you have like less than a 90% chance to hit, like it's not gonna hit. It's not gonna hit, baby.
That's not how it works.
What?
That's not. I don't remember that being how it works.
Well, whatever. I do remember it feeling like like
I know that the statistics are different from what is displayed in Fire Emblem. Yes, but
really?
I think it's sort of.
I didn't
like
know that. I didn't know they really were fake.
I feel like I remember reading a little bit that it's sort of like you're more like higher up you're more likely to hit than it seems, and lower down you're less likely to hit than it seems.
Wow.
But I don't have a source on that right now. So
I have a source on that. It's vibes.
And I don't know, like there's probably different across the different games.
Of course. I just remember feeling like, oh, if you have a hit chance in the 80s, like, it's probably not going to hit. Which, like, that's not how statistics work.
Well, you were just very cautious, right? Because in those games, you didn't have the rewind turn system, right? So if something went wrong, you had to make sure you had your contingency plan. But anyway, there just wasn't in simple reflecting here. I just couldn't really think a lot of like, entertainment games that are still like, oh, I feel like I'm learning something, or like, they did a lot of research for this game, right? Versus just, the work of making their own sort of lore books, right? Yeah.
You did mention in your kind of brainstorming notes about this farming games, and I think it's really interesting to me that like farming and gardening, that there isn't too much good representation of like especially very realistic gardening at all. It's all gotten so gamified.
Yeah. Yeah, that's fair.
It was just
I mean, you
notable.
could point to I was thinking of like, oh, like skills, like you learn a little bit about farming through this, but you could say that about any sort of like task type game, you know? Like theoretically, I don't know, Coffee Talk, does that teach you how to make coffee? No, not really. Right? Because the act of making drinks in that game is very like just gamified. Or like there's lots of like running a shop games. Does that really teach you how to run a shop?
No,
not really.
It almost teaches you worse.
Does City Skylines teach you how to do city planning? I don't think so.
Yeah.
I don't think so. Not really.
Yeah, it is interesting to think about how many games it's like, oh, actually this teaches you wrong.
Yeah.
Do you think that Guitar Hero is an edutainment game?
No. It does sort of teach you that, like, to get, like, the essential chords, you do have to have great finger flexibility.
Yes.
Right? What's the very hard guitar chord? C something?
I'm sure that there's more than one.
Yeah, but, the pinky in the Guitar Hero, it's teaching you that you really have to be able to manipulate your fingers in a way I simply was not ever able to.
Like, teaching you rhythm, though.
That's fair. I guess you could say, there's games that help you practice your rhythm. Yeah. Which, I did, I was looking a little bit, like, do these things, like, actually work? Right? I didn't look too into it, but I know just from knowing that, like, stuff like Sesame Street, right, and
there's a lot of
TV
research
type
into Sesame
edutainment
Street.
are effective, right, and in early childhood learning, for helping kids learn things. But there wasn't a ton on games, whether games are effective. I feel like, just for me, like, yes, it was probably helpful for learning typing, for example, right? Because that's like a concrete skill that you're practicing. And games are good at helping you learn, like, concrete skills, right? But the only thing I found a paper called, like, Foundations of Game-Based Learning, which was by Place et al. And it was interesting. It wasn't, like, like a study of any sort, but just sort of laying out research of, like, what about games is conducive to learning. What about games, is unique in the fact that it can teach things. And there are a couple of points I found interesting. They broke it down into, like, a few different, like, foundational things. So, like, in cognitive foundations, they talked about games can give repeated opportunity to practice skills and apply your current knowledge, and then can easily also provide, like, different adjusted experiences building upon that knowledge, right? And that is how games operate, right? I just beat 9 Souls, and I was sort of in this reflecting, like, the process of beating a boss in that is, like, learning, right? Oh, I have an answer to this pattern that they're asking, right? And then there's a new pattern that's slightly different, and so you have to then adjust your answer accordingly, right? And that's how games work, right? Especially games with, like, a growing combat system of sorts, is that you're learning how to do that combat system over the course of the game. So if you could find a way to apply that sort of system to a learning outcome, right, or a topic of education, like, theoretically, that sounds great, right? Except you also have to find a way to make that motivating to the student. Because, the reason they might play a game is because it's fun, or they're invested in what happens next, or they really enjoy the music or the art or whatever, right? And so, to make a good educational game, you kind of have to also make a good game, which it's interesting. I don't know.
Do you feel like we could get the Ring Fit Adventure people on this?
That is, I feel like we have Nintendo and it's, the mysterious companies that it has developed these things that they won't talk about until after the game is released. Does, I feel like, have the thing worked out of, like, physical exercise, right? And sort of like typing, too. I feel like when there's a physical component involved, we figure that out, right?
Yeah.
It's just the mental component, right, of learning something more brain-focused than body-focused. I don't think, we have a good model of. And this whole paper was, like, about, you can't really make a full, like, model of game-based learning because there's not a full model of learning.
Yeah.
Right? You can just sort of reflect on it generally as you want. So
I feel like I can see a path to a ring math adventure, you know?
yeah.
Like math, I understand how you could take sort of we've had pretty successful, pretty popular sort of fitness-based games. Or, like you said, physical skill-based games. And I feel like it's pretty clear to me how, like in the same way as with Ring Fit, you get more exercises over time and like they're harder or they're different or you have more strategies, right? I could see how you could do that with like math of a certain degree of difficulty, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's harder for me to imagine, and it's funny, right? Because of course, like the biggest example right now is the Assassin's Creed thing. It's harder for me to imagine how you could really gamify, like really any humanities subject.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I agree. Or you have to make like, you could learn one thing in math and then it more clearly builds upon itself, right, as you go. Right, you learn a skill and then you can apply it to the next skill and so on and so forth. And I feel like with history or English or theater or whatever, it doesn't as like when you learn things in that, obviously they build on each other, right? But in a less sort of obvious way, I guess.
Oh, in a way where it's less easy for the game to give you points.
Right? Yes, that too.
Like vocabulary or grammar or whatever, I guess you could probably build a game around, but I think that'd get pretty I don't know. Maybe I'm just revealing my own like biases, I guess. I feel like that would get pretty boring relative to like a math-based game that was similar.
I'd be interested in like a series of games that like do like one book sort of experience, like a visual novel type thing, right? Where like the choices you make can like help you explore different interpretations of things, but like one game per like a common book that you'll find taught in English classrooms.
Sure, like a classic comic book, but for gamified.
Yeah.
What would the like? I sort of see what you're saying, but expand it a little more for me. What's my Pride and Prejudice
I don't know.
Game? No, I don't. I'm not doing that as like my usual like. Oh, it's the end of the episode. And I don't have any ideas. Like Emma, you do all the work. I just mean like I'm curious about that because I think it's a good idea.
I don't know. I feel like it's a little bit it would have to be a little bit prescriptive, right? So you wouldn't want to just do this. You'd want to have discussions as a class because games cannot handle free responses, for example, and probably will never. But for example, you could play as like the main character, and you get through a scene, and there's perhaps like a cut. You could either explore sort of different avenues through the scene, maybe, or you could watch a scene play out and then have like a little bit of a reflective thing of like, what am I thinking here? Right. What's the internal motivation that I'm having?
Yeah.
Why am I doing this? What's significant about this? But, a little bit less direct than that, I guess.
Yeah.
But just a way to explore, like, the interiority of the characters and the things that are happening, I guess, in a way that encourages the player to identify a little bit or something.
I see that. I like that. I could also see something that's like, in the same way as like you read Shakespeare out loud in class, and that's better than just read, like that kind of thing where it's like you're really just sort of like playing through something and it's not necessarily very interactive, but you're getting more out of it because you're playing through it as opposed to just reading it, maybe.
Yeah. Yeah.
But none of this will ever happen because Shark Tank killed edutainment. And, I mean, also, it's not, it's much harder to impress children with games now than it was in 1998 or whatever.
Yeah.
Everyone is used to their high-quality AAA games, and throw in Carmen Sandiego at them is just not, it's not impressive. It's not fun relative to what they're doing. And because you're having to compete with these, companies that are huge and huge and huge and have all these resources, and you're having to compete with phones, it does make sense to me why this market sort of doesn't really exist, because it's got to be a very difficult needle to thread. In the same way as a premium app game experience, I think, or in a similar way. So sorry, kids, no learning for you.
You'll never learn again.
I still can't believe you don't remember Putt Putt.
I don't remember Putt Putt. I remember the They Might Be Giants interactive experience.
That too.
Was that an edu game? I don't think so. It was just a weird little thing you could do.
It certainly taught me that Beethoven's wig is big.
Yeah, I'm sure that's correct and very factual.
Well, Emma, any closing thoughts? Any wishes for entertainment or education or edutainment?
I don't know. I'd like more historical fiction games. How about that? That'd be fun.
Make more historical fiction games for Emma. And on that note, thank you for listening to another episode of Talk This.
It's dangerous to podcast alone.
Do you have a favorite game that taught you something? Do you feel like there are games that are being made that are doing this now? We just don't know about them because we're not 7-year-olds, and why would we know about them? How did you learn to type? If you have thoughts on any of these questions or anything else that we talked about this week, hit us up on social media. We're on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube at Talk This Podcast. You can also visit our website, www.talkthispodcast.com, where you can read all about the show, check out the games in the hat, and read our blog, featuring long-running series Clickbait Boyfriend and Split Screen. But most importantly, if you enjoy the show, you should subscribe. We're on Apple Podcasts, YouTube Podcasts, TuneIn, Spotify, Pandora Podcasts, online and on the app, Overcast, Podcasts, anywhere that you can find podcasts. Subscribe to Talk This.
Next week, we're talking about Octodad and Tales of Kenzera.
Right.
Zhao. Tales of Kenzera Zhao, I think.
So look forward to that, and in 2 weeks, it'll be Emma's turn.
Woo! I don't know what we're talking about. I don't know.
We'll find out. But that's it for this week's show. Thanks for listening. Emma, what do we want people to learn this week?
I don't know. What do we want? What's your topic?
This week, I hope that Mario or a fake lady at a cosmetic store counter teach you something, whether or not you're allowed to use their name and likeness or not.